Let's dive right into this explainer, because if you're looking at your calendar today, July 13, 2026, you might want to brace yourself. In exactly 2 days, the entire global landscape for AI deployment is going to radically, irrevocably change. We are staring down this hyper-condensed 19-day window where the international rules of the game for artificial intelligence are basically being rewritten from scratch.
What we're witnessing is this massive, synchronized global instinct just kicking in all at once. 3 completely different but massively consequential AI regulatory regimes are going live within 3 weeks of each other. It starts on July 15 with China's anthropomorphic measures. Then we flip to August 1 for the U.S. Executive Order 1449 framework. And literally the next day, August 2, the EU AI Act reaches full legal applicability. The ticking clock has officially started.
Which brings us to Section 1, 3 superpowers, 3 different gates.
Let's analyze how China, the EU, and the US are approaching this exact same moment in time. They each have radically different theories of what a pre-release AI gate actually is. China's creating a strict approval gate, and that's motivated by content control and social stability. The EU, on the other hand, is building a conformity gate, heavily focused on fundamental rights and product safety. And the US? Well, they've set up what you might call a voluntary vestibule, driven mostly by national security. Think about what that means in practice. A single AI model could successfully pass all 3 of these global gates, and yet it's being evaluated for 3 almost entirely non-overlapping things. It's a pretty fascinating regulatory maze.
Moving on to Section 2, China and the state as co-designer.
Let's break down the actual mechanics of China's regime. They operate the only true pre-release approval system among the major global economies. It's governed by 5 different top-level state agencies, and the steps are incredibly rigorous. First off, you need a full security assessment before any deployment can even happen. Then comes a strict 5-step registration process, and during this time, the regulator can and absolutely will demand design modifications before you ever get that filing number for the public registry. The reality here is stark. If you want to operate AI at scale in this jurisdiction, you have to treat the Chinese government as an active co-designer of your algorithms.
And that strictness extends well past the release date. The ongoing obligations are intense. Say you have a security incident. That has to be reported within a really tight 24-hour window. Government information requests, you've got 48 hours to provide precise answers. And most notably, they require government-ordered algorithm adjustments to be implemented basically on demand. So you're looking at a highly targeted, iterative, use-case-by-use-case environment.
Next up, Section 3, the European Union and conformity before market.
Shifting our focus over to the EU, they've constructed what's probably best described as a comprehensive paperwork and process machine. Rather than those per-use case tweaks we just talked about in China, the EU AI Act applies broad, sweeping rules based on risk. The mechanics here involve strict risk categorization, exhaustive conformity assessments, and incredibly detailed technical documentation, plus there's post-market monitoring. And if your general-purpose AI, your GPI model, sits above their systemic risk compute line, you're looking at extra evaluation and incident duties. This entire massive regulatory machine hits full legal applicability on August 2nd.
Now, there is a really vital legal caveat floating around that builders need to be aware of regarding the digital omnibus package. Yes, it was provisionally agreed upon and approved by the European Parliament on June 16. But while this package might eventually shift certain high-risk deadlines down the road, you absolutely have to understand that it is not yet in force. Until formal council adoption and official journal publication actually happen, August 2 remains your legally operative hard deadline. So don't let anyone tell you the deadlines have already moved, because they definitely haven't.
Section 4. The United States and the voluntary vestibule. The U.S. takes a truly unique approach under Executive Order 1449. Washington deliberately built an access window rather than a strict approval gate. It's by far the lightest touch design of the big 3. It uses a 30-day government evaluation framework, but it is strictly opt-in. And honestly, the most fascinating part of all this is that the central measuring instrument, the benchmark criteria used to evaluate these systems, is kept entirely classified. No one outside a secure vault can actually read it. You opt in, and the primary carrot for doing so is securing trusted partner status for highly lucrative government procurement, which makes voluntary a very interesting word choice. Before we tie these 3 together, we've got to briefly mention the odd one out, the United Kingdom. While the rest of the world is busy building complex walls and gates, the UK is still running a principles-based sector regulator model. It's highly flexible, fast to adapt, and formally gate-free. That makes the UK increasingly unique right now. in an era where basically everyone else is mandating strict compliance checkpoints.
Which brings us to Section 5, Convergence versus Design and the Core Paradox.
So the crucial point here is understanding the absolute paradox of these 19 days. Globally, there's this completely unified instinct. Every serious jurisdiction agrees that AI systems must meet the state before they meet the public. They all agree on the need for a gate. But then, that instinct immediately splinters into completely divergent designs. China gates for control, the EU gates for rights, and the US gates for security. The instinct converges perfectly, but the actual structural designs completely diverge, entirely based on each region's distinct societal goals.
Moving to Section 6, the Builder's Dilemma.
So what does all this actually mean for the people writing the code and deploying these systems? Well, if you're an enterprise deploying AI, this fractured global landscape forces an intense, highly practical shift in how you fundamentally construct your software stack. There's this great quote from our source material: "Jurisdiction is becoming an architectural property." That is such a profound takeaway. Building a sovereign air-gapped edition for one region and a governed EU cloud edition for another is no longer just some clever marketing segmentation strategy. It's mandatory compliance layering. If your deployment calendar doesn't account for all three of these vastly different structural gates, you are building for a market you're not actually legally allowed to be in.
Finally, Section 7, the open-weight loophole.
We need to look at the ultimate steelman argument against these new regulations, because it highlights a massive structural vulnerability in this newly constructed global net. First, heavy pre-release regimes inherently favor wealthy incumbents, the companies who can actually afford to navigate these massive compliance bottlenecks. But more importantly, none of these three gates bind an open-weight release from a lab operating outside their jurisdiction. Just think about that for a second. These massive, incredibly complex regulatory gates are going up at the exact moment the fastest-moving part of the AI frontier can simply bypass them entirely by using out-of-jurisdiction open-weight releases. The frontier just walks right around the gates.
Which leaves us with the defining tension of the second half of 2026. Can regional pre-release gates actually stop open-weight models from the frontier? It is the ultimate test of these 19 days of global regulation. If a model's weights are open and distributed globally from a non-gated jurisdiction, do these tightly controlled approval and conformity vestibules even matter? That's what I want you to really think about, how these massive national regulatory efforts will actually function in a totally decentralized digital reality. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we continue to unpack the cutting edge.